There are some new images and details for Oppenheimer thanks to a newly published article by Empire magazine here in the UK. We get interviews with Christopher Nolan and Cillian Murphy where they talk about visualising the physics in J. Robert Oppenheimer's mind on screen, the movie being an essential cinematic experience, and much more surrounding the filmmaking process. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the images and details shared, breaking down the newest info from the film. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my content surrounding Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. But without further ado, let's discuss the new images and details for Oppenheimer. So the new edition of Empire magazine has provided us with a lot of new images and interviews for Christopher Nolan's highly anticipated film. The new article details an extended conversation with Christopher Nolan at his post-production facility in LA, where he's putting the final touches on the movie, and Empire was also able to speak to lead actor Cillian Murphy about the whole process and certain elements of this gripping story. The images in the article include Cillian Murphy's Oppenheimer and Matt Damon's Leslie Groves surveying the test location of the atomic bomb, more exclusive looks at that location during the night of the testing, multiple behind-the-scenes shots of Nolan and his cast on set, and an image of both Murphy and Robert Downey Jr.'s characters meeting for the first time, showcasing a once friendly relationship that's soon to become a heated rivalry. There's other photos in this article as well, and I will be presenting them on screen throughout the video. Something to note though is that a handful of these images aren't in the greatest of quality because of how small they were on the page, but I did do my absolute best to scan them in the best possible quality I could. But now that that intro is out the way, let's get into the extended interviews and all of the most interesting things that were mentioned in this new article. So after Empire were treated behind closed doors to some new footage from Oppenheimer, which they called unnerving, Christopher Nolan began talking about how he first became hooked on the idea of taking on this story. He said, "I actually don't remember when I first got hooked by the notion of, they literally thought they might destroy the world." But he then explains that when making Tenet, there was a pivotal moment that shifted his focus towards taking it on. That film made a reference to Oppenheimer, with Priya's character telling John David Washington's protagonist that as Oppenheimer's team approached the Trinity test, he became concerned that the detonation might produce a chain reaction engulfing the world. The filmmaker said that following that moment, he couldn't stop thinking about the idea. He said, "It was this idea that these guys did this calculation and couldn't eliminate the possibility that they'd set fire to the atmosphere and destroy the whole world. But they had to go ahead and do the Trinity test anyway. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube," which was really what Tenet was about. In dealing with that, I then became interested in looking at that story not as an analogy for a science fiction concept, but for its own sake, because it is just so irresistibly dramatic. The article also mentions the moment where Robert Pattinson gave Christopher Nolan a book of Oppenheimer's speeches during the Tenet wrap party, and that this led to the filmmaker eventually reading American Prometheus, the book that his new movie is based on. Nolan said, "It was these people trying to adapt to a new world in which this terrible power exists, and trying to figure out how geopolitically the world could deal with it, what the consequence was going to be when it was absolutely new and fresh." It's a provocative statement, but I believe it to be true, that Oppenheimer is the most important man who ever lived, whether you like it or not. Once Empire followed this up by asking Nolan whether the film would be a psychological deep dive as well, he replied by saying, "Really, you have to look at it in terms of story. It's a story of someone who's involved in a very specific and revolutionary turn in the world. He's there at the dawn of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and the incorporation of that, this revolutionary shift in thinking about physics." And when touching on that idea of really seeing this revolutionary turn, Christopher Nolan made it clear that he wanted to portray this from a central perspective. While there's apparently many test explosions and big climactic moments in the film, the most difficult part for Nolan was working out how to put the audience inside the mind of J. Robert Oppenheimer and showcase the integral thought behind that process on screen. He said, "There's the idea of how we get in somebody's head and see how we're visualizing this radical reinvention of physics. One of the things that cinema has struggled with historically is the representation of intelligence or genius. It very often fails to engage people. The first person I showed the script to when it was finished after Emma Thomas read it was Andrew Jackson, the visual effects supervisor. I said to him, we have to find a way into this guy's head. We've got to see the world the way he sees it. We've got to see the atoms moving. We've got to see the way he's imagining waves of energy, the quantum world. And then we have to see how that translates into the Trinity test. We have to feel the danger, feel the threat of all of this somehow. My challenge to him was, let's do all these things, but without any computer graphics. It's more than people writing on a window." And it turns out that this thought very much guided Nolan when it came to the structure of the film that he was putting on screen, and specifically his desire to keep the film as subjective as possible, which also affected the script. He continued by saying, "I actually wrote in the first person, which I've never done before. I don't know if anyone's ever done it before, but the point of it is, with the colour sequences, which is the bulk of the film, everything is told from Oppenheimer's point of view. You're literally kind of looking through his eyes." When he says everything, he means everything, descriptions, directions, all of it. It's an odd thing to do, but it was a reminder to me of how to shoot the film. It was a reminder to everybody involved in the project, okay, this is the point of view of every scene. I wanted to really go through this story with Oppenheimer. I didn't want to sit by him and judge him. That seemed a pointless exercise. That's more the stuff of documentary, of political theory, or history of science. This is a story that you experience with him, you don't judge him. You, like him, are faced with these ethical dilemmas. Now, what Nolan said here is probably the most interesting thing I've heard about the film so far. Having read most of the book, one of the things that I probably wanted a tad more of is that exploration of the science or thoughts inside of Oppenheimer's mind. It deals specifically with his experience and talks about the reactions of others towards certain events, but we rarely go into his mind and get a clearer picture of how everything adds up from a scientific standpoint. And if Nolan is doing that like he says, and he's expanding visually on those thoughts, I think it sounds like the film is actually going beyond what's on the pages. This really excites me, and like he said in the interview, it really gives a more detailed perspective of the intelligence or genius when it comes to the central character. Speaking about Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy was then included in this article, and Empire began to speak to him about taking on the role. He said, "The prospect of playing Oppenheimer was terrifying and exciting in equal measure," which I think is the best place to be as an actor starting off on a project. You can't sit back and think, this is going to be a piece of piss. It started, and so did the hunger. I could feel this hunger for the character and for the job. He is this iconic figure, the father of the atomic bomb, the man who stole fire from the gods. He's a divisive character, and he's a very hard, complex character to figure out, kind of unknowable. So that is different than playing a cop who's got scruples in a TV show. Not that those aren't worthy things to make, but this had an added layer to it. I think it's a truly essential cinematic experience, and I know that's what I'm supposed to say, that's the studio line, but you have to see this in the cinema on the biggest effing screen possible. There are moments in it that will blow people's lids off. So it's clear that Cillian is really excited about how people will react to the film, and also how interesting it was for him to really delve into the mind of that character and try to present his inner intelligence, his almost alien-like mannerisms, and his eventual grief that takes form internally. Empire then makes it clear that this is only the acting, because the filmmaking was going to go even deeper. So coming to that very point, Nolan starts to detail a bit more about filming one of the most anticipated scenes of the year and capturing it using practical effects. Nolan wanted to literally blow people away by shooting a recreation of the Trinity test out in the New Mexico desert using absolutely no CGI. He said, "I find CG is rarely able to grab you. It tends to feel safe even if it's impressive and beautiful. It's difficult to make you feel danger. We needed it to feel threatening, nasty, and frightening to the audience. I've done a lot of explosions in a lot of films, but there is something very unique and particular about being out in the desert in the middle of the night with a big cast and really just doing some enormous explosions and capturing that. You couldn't help but come back to this moment when they were doing this on the ultimate scale, that in the back of their minds, they knew there was this possibility that they would set fire to the atmosphere. It was pretty amazing to engage in that kind of tension." He then spoke of special effects supervisor Scott Fisher elaborating a bit more on the various approaches that were taken to pull off these large-scale explosions. He said there were very experimental approaches, some microscopic and tiny, some on a giant scale using explosives and magnesium flares and big black powder explosions of petrol, and then some absolute tiny ones using interactions of different particles, different oils, different liquids. So that's what we got surrounding specific details on how they approach the filmmaking, but before the article came to an end, Nolan and Murphy did speak about the overall importance of this story. Of course, it doesn't get much bigger or important than tackling the creation of the first atomic bomb, and in turn, the potential destruction of the world. The director said, "Look, the ultimate stakes of any big blockbuster is the survival of the world, and that's what this story is. I know of no story with higher stakes than Oppenheimer's story, that's just the truth of it. It's tricky using a word like entertainment when you're talking about something so serious, but entertainment in movies takes many forms. This is such an involving, compelling tale that we had the privilege of telling. On that level, I really enjoyed it, but there have been times where, yeah, it is so unnerving and a sense of despair can set in. The film contains a great adventure, a great love story, it has espionage, thriller elements, and all the rest." And Cillian Murphy added to this idea of importance that Nolan talked about by mentioning how the film affected him with all of the current fears surrounding a nuclear threat. He said, "I do think about it an awful lot. It brought home to me just what these guys were doing and how the world would never be the same again. Wait till you see the film, it's so unnerving. It has definitely stayed with me. I'm a pretty positive, optimistic person, and in the work environment, it doesn't help anybody to be going around with your knapsack of doom. I don't know if it's healthy to walk around thinking about it all the time. I certainly don't know if I have the intellectual or emotional capacity for that. But maybe these men did. Many people spoke about Oppenheimer being the most brilliant of them all. I think that intellect becomes a burden because it's like you have access to a different dimension in your thinking. And if you're in that dimension all the time, that must be really hard on your personal life." And of course, if you've read the later stages of the book, you'll know that what Cillian said here is tragically true when it comes to the story of Oppenheimer. It escalated to a point where his security clearance was revoked and he was humiliated and tried for feeding information to the Soviets. To me, this story really is one about the idea of trust and how the world had little of it and still has little of it today. It's why tensions have only increased between countries countries and individuals with different ideologies, and I think what Cillian said here is completely bang on the money surrounding the themes that Oppenheimer deals with. I can't wait to see it, and I'm sure we'll be getting much more interviews and marketing material in the build up to July 21st, giving us further insights on the creative process and also the thematic importance of this story. But they were the main images and details released from the new Empire edition of Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. I'm interested to hear what you guys think towards the new images and details discussed, alongside what personally excites you the most about Nolan's upcoming film. So let me know down below in the comment section. For much more videos and news on this summer's upcoming releases, including Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.